Arizona Territory. September 1878. The sun hammered the Arroyo Seco like a blacksmith's iron on an anvil. Nothing lived out here but heat, dust, and the low, patient wind that whispered lies about water. Then a rifle cracked sharp as a judge's gavel. A dark horse screamed and folded hard into the cracked white earth. Its rider tumbled free, rolled once, and came up clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. From the ridges above, 3 more shots kicked dust at his heels, driving him like cattle toward the narrow cut in the rocks. In his coat, sealed in red wax, wrote a single envelope from Washington. A piece of paper that could hand 23 families back their own land, or bury a man's empire in the dust. Powerful men back in Tucson had already paid good money to make sure that envelope never saw another sunrise. Out here on this last honest mile of desert, one rider was learning the oldest truth of the West: some debts are collected with lead, and some men refuse to die quiet. He chose Caden Rourke because no one would ask questions when he didn't come back. That was the whole of it. Not skill, not geography, not timing. Just the simple, brutal arithmetic of a man with no attachments and no one watching the door. Aldrich Galt set the paper down on his desk. One name circled in pencil. He picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, set it down again. Outside his window, Tucson was moving through its Tuesday morning horses and boot heels on packed dirt, the smell of bread from the bakery on Pennington Street, a dog arguing with something that probably deserved it. Normal sounds. The sounds of a town that believed itself to be running smoothly. It was running smoothly. That was Galt's doing, and he took no particular pride in it the way a clockmaker takes no pride in a clock that keeps time. It was supposed to keep time. That was the point. His deputy, a thin man named Creel with the hollow eyes of someone who'd stopped sleeping well around the time he took this particular job, stood on the other side of the desk, waiting. Creel had been with Galt for 6 years, long enough to understand the rules, which were essentially that there was one rule: do not bring problems back to this office. Resolve them before they arrived at the door. "Tell me again," Galt said. "Drifter, 37, no family, no ranch, no fixed address. Worked Flagstaff last spring, Yuma before that." Creel paused. "Hale says he needs $15 badly enough to ride through hell for it. Says he's the type who doesn't ask questions about a job." "Men who don't ask questions," Galt said, "usually don't have enough stake in anything to make asking worthwhile." "Yes, sir. And the route? Hale will give him Arroyo Seco, southeast approach. 3 days to Maricopa Wells if he rides steady." Galt stood, moved to the window. He'd lived in Tucson 11 years and still thought of it as a place he was operating from rather than a place he belonged to. That distinction had served him very well. You made different decisions when you weren't attached. You saw more clearly. You didn't confuse what you'd built with what you were. The South Gila Basin had taken 4 years to consolidate. 4 years of patient acquisition, buying debt here, calling in favors there, making strategic use of the uncertainty that followed the war, to position himself as the man who could provide what isolated farming families couldn't build alone. Water access, road rights, market connections. He'd provided all of it. He still did. He just charged. Substantially. Indefinitely. In ways that made getting ahead feel always slightly out of reach, always just around the corner. Always dependent on another season, another good harvest, another year of steady payment to the man who controlled the roads and the water and the access to everything beyond the immediate horizon. It was a sound model. He'd built it carefully. He was not interested in watching it dismantled by a federal document carried by a drifter who didn't even know what he was carrying. "The commissioner's office in Washington signed the grant in August," Galt said. He was still looking out the window. At the normal sounds of a normal Tuesday morning in a town that ran smoothly because someone had arranged the pieces. If that document reaches Maricopa Wells and gets registered, every family in the South Gila Basin owns their land outright. No more road fees, no more water access agreements, no more lease arrangements, no more anything. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't spend 12 years building what I built to watch it handed over because a clerk in Washington decided to be sentimental about land grants. No, sir. Send 4 men to Arroyo Seco. Make it look like robbery. Take everything he carries and burn the envelope." He turned from the window. "Nothing comes back here. No names, no connection to this office. Men who can follow a simple instruction without adding details I didn't ask for." "Understood." "And Creel," he said it quietly. The particular quiet that people around him had learned over 6 years to pay very close attention to. Choose men who follow instructions without improvising. The last thing I need is someone being clever about this. Creel left. Galt returned to his desk, to his reports, his correspondence. The name Caden Rourke had already stopped mattering to him in any personal sense. It was a logistical problem, the kind that arose from time to time when the world changed in ways that created inconvenient pressures. And he'd handled it the way he handled all such problems, by delegating the resolution to the appropriate people and returning his attention to the work that actually required his particular capabilities. He turned the page. He did not think about Caden Rourke again that morning. He didn't need to. That was what Creel was for. That was what the 4 men at Arroyo Seco were for. The machinery was in motion. The machinery would handle it. What Galt did not account for, what he had never in 12 years found occasion to account for, was the possibility that the machinery would fail. Not because he was careless, because he had built a world in which failure had consequences severe enough that it almost never happened. Almost never, he would discover, was not never. And the difference between those two things was currently riding a dark bay horse southeast along the Arroyo Seco route, carrying $15 of Hale's money and a sealed envelope, and 10 years of accumulated grief that had made him, in the specific way that grief sometimes does, very difficult to kill. 3 days west of Tucson, the trading post at Redstone sat at the fraying edge of everything. A main building with a porch that needed attention. A small corral holding 3 horses that had all seen better decades. A water trough that Brixton Hale had been meaning to repair for somewhere between 18 months, and never, depending on how generous you were with the word meaning. Hale was 45 and looked like a man who'd been intended for something better. You could still see it. In the set of his jaw. In the careful way he measured words before releasing them, like someone who'd once believed that saying the right thing at the right moment could change outcomes. He'd had plans, a spread of his own, good water, a few good horses, the kind of quiet life that doesn't ask too much and gives back something real. Then a bad season. Then alone. Then Aldrich Galt had appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the right offer, and the paperwork had seemed straightforward until Hale was deep enough inside it to understand it wasn't straightforward at all. By then the trading post wasn't really his anymore. The debt wasn't payable, and Hale himself wasn't free in any way the word was designed to describe. He told himself it wasn't his fault. He told himself this with some frequency. He was on the porch working on this particular project when Caden Rourke rode in from the North Trail just before noon. Hale watched him dismount, watched him tie the horse, a dark bay well kept, the one good thing about a man who traveled light with the loose, practiced movements of someone who'd done it 10,000 times and stopped noticing. Rourke was lean, sun-darkened, the kind of face that had moved through young without arriving at old, settling somewhere in between that didn't give much away. He walked like a man carrying something heavy that didn't show from the outside. Hale recognized that walk. He owned a version of it himself. "Rourke," he called. The man looked up without breaking stride. "That's me. Come inside, out of the sun." The inside of Redstone smelled like dried goods and harness leather and the staleness of a building that sees more transactions than conversation. Hale kept it clean. Whatever else had been taken from him, he kept the shelves organized and the floor swept and the accounts legible. Small dignities, the kind you hold on to when larger ones are gone. He set the envelope on the counter between them. Standard size. Good paper. Red wax seal with the embossed mark of the General Land Office out of Washington. It looked official, because it was official. That was the thing about this whole situation that Hale couldn't quite make peace with. The document was completely real. The families were real. The land grant was legitimate. He was helping destroy something legitimate because a man he owed money to had told him to. "Sealed delivery," Hale said. His voice was steady. He'd practiced steady. "Federal business. Ride southeast along Arroyo Seco, cross at the shallow point near the cottonwoods, pick up the old territorial road heading east. Maricopa Wells. The federal land agent there is expecting it." Caden picked up the envelope, turned it once. The wax was intact. He held it the way a man holds something when he's taking its measure without committing to a conclusion. Timeline. 3 days comfortable, 2 if you push. Trouble on the route. Shouldn't be. Hale held eye contact. He'd practiced that too. Quiet stretch. I've sent riders through twice this month. Caden set the envelope down. 15 up front, 10 on return. That's right. Why me? You've got men who know that route. Hale had this answer ready, smooth and true, in the specific way that makes the best lies work, accurate as far as it goes and carefully not going far enough. My regular rider's got a bad shoulder, job's time sensitive. Someone mentioned you were between work and reliable. Caden looked at him for a moment. Not suspicious, not searching for something specific, just the look of a man who'd gotten out of the habit of believing the world was arranged in his favor, who'd made peace with that fact without quite liking it. He picked up the envelope. "I'll ride out at first light," he said. Hale counted out the money. His hands were steady. He was proud of that in the small, hollow way you're proud of things that don't deserve pride. Caden pocketed the cash and the envelope, nodded once, left. Hale stood at the counter for a long time after the hoofbeats faded. He thought about stopping it, about walking out onto the porch and calling the man back and saying what exactly. That the route wasn't quiet, that 4 men with rifles were waiting at Arroyo Seco, that the envelope Hale had just handed him was the reason someone had decided he needed to not arrive anywhere. He thought about Galt, about the debt, about what happened to people who got between Aldrich Galt and something Galt had decided was his. He swept the counter instead, went back to his accounts. He told himself Rourke was a practical man, a drifter. Men like that understood the world was rough and didn't waste time expecting otherwise. He told himself that. He kept telling himself that quietly for the next 4 days. It didn't help as much as he'd hoped. The Arroyo in September is a lesson in hidden things. The surface is cracked and pale, looks like nothing alive has passed through in years, like the land itself has given up the argument and accepted its own end. Bone dry, sun-bleached. The kind of terrain that makes a man feel exposed in every direction, nothing between him and the horizon but scrub brush and the relentless fact of the heat. But underneath, somewhere in the deep dark below, the hardpan water still moves. You can feel it if you press your palm to the ground long enough and stay patient. A faint coolness that doesn't match what's above. A pulse that has nothing to do with anything living and yet isn't quite dead either. Something persisting despite every indication that it shouldn't. Caden had ridden this stretch before, 3, maybe 4 years back. Different job, different horse. A version of himself that was only slightly more intact than the current model, though he hadn't known that at the time. Or had known it and filed it under things I will deal with later, which was where it had stayed, growing slowly heavier every year, the way things grow heavier when they aren't dealt with. Jesse had loved this country. That was the thing he kept returning to in the way you return to a bruise, not because it feels good, but because you need to verify it's still there, still real, still the shape you remember. Jesse had actually loved the desert. Not the resigned tolerance of a man stuck somewhere he didn't choose, not the affection people develop for difficult things out of sheer exposure. Genuine love. The particular love of someone who sees something others overlook. Called it honest country. Said it never pretended to be something it wasn't. Said you always knew exactly where you stood with the desert because it didn't have the energy or the inclination to lie to you about what it was. The desert doesn't lie to you about what it is, Jesse used to say. That's more than you can say for most people. Caden had thought it was foolish romanticism when he was 27. Still young enough to believe that the world had more reliable things to offer than a landscape too harsh for most of what tried to live in it. He understood it now. 10 years of drifting had taught him things he'd have preferred not to know. That people lie constantly and fluently and often without knowing they're doing it. That towns advertise themselves as welcoming and mean it until you need something specific and inconvenient. That bosses explain conditions completely except for the parts that would make you say no. That men swear up and down about where their cattle were and how the fence line runs, and sometimes those sworn statements collide in the dark on a warm night in late summer outside Prescott, and the sound that results isn't words anymore. Jesse had been standing next to him, one moment there. Talking, probably. Jesse was always talking. He talked the way some men drink steadily, comfortably, as though words were a resource that replenished itself automatically and didn't need to be rationed. One moment there, the next not. And Caden had stood in that dark with his hands still raised, the standard posture of a man trying to prevent a situation from escalating. Hands up, voice level, no sudden movements. And the situation had escalated past every point where his hands or his voice could do anything about it. And when it was over, Jesse was on the ground with that expression of surprise that Caden had never quite been able to stop seeing when he closed his eyes, and nothing in the subsequent 10 years had found a way to make that fact smaller or more bearable, or less entirely immovably his fault. He'd left Prescott the following spring. No plan, just movement. Because movement meant you weren't standing still in the place where it happened. And standing still in the place where it happened was the one thing he was absolutely certain he could not do. He'd kept moving since. Gotten very good at it. Gotten skilled at finding work that didn't require him to matter to anyone, didn't require anyone to matter to him, didn't require staying long enough to develop the kind of presence that people notice when it's gone. He'd taken the job from Hale because he needed $15. But also, and this was the part he was less comfortable acknowledging, because he'd stopped caring enough to say no to things that seemed dangerous. There was a distinction there that mattered, between taking a risky job for practical reasons and taking a risky job because you didn't particularly care what happened to you. He'd been living in the second category for a while now. Knox's ears went forward. Caden's hand moved to the rifle before his mind caught up. Trained reflex. Body knowing things ahead of thought. The shot came from the left ridge. Not at him. At Knox. The horse went down fast. No warning. One moment, 1,100 pounds of living animal, the next, the ground coming up wrong, and his left shoulder taking the impact and the world tilting sideways and loud and disorganized. He rolled, pushed, got his feet under him before his vision cleared. Something in his right side registered as heat first, pain second. He filed it under deal with later and moved. Left, into the brush. Into the narrow cut between the rock formations where the walls came close enough to make horses useless and give a single man on foot a fighting chance. 3 more shots behind him, kicking up dust, not aimed to hit, cutting off the forward route, hurting him deliberately. These men had prepared an ambush, not stumbled into one. 4 voices, maybe 5. He counted them the way Jesse had taught him, not stopping to listen but cataloging while moving. Voices under pressure tell you things. These weren't panicked. Weren't perfectly coordinated either. Hired men motivated by pay rather than purpose. Competent enough to worry about. He ran until the voices fell back. Walked. Stopped. His knees made the decision before he did, dropping him onto the desert floor. He caught himself on one palm. Gravel bit in. He stayed there on one knee in the full afternoon sun and breathed and let his body run its inventory. Ribs, right side, a burning worse than bruising, better than dying. He pressed his palm against it, looked at his hand. Blood. Not the bright surge of something serious. The slower seep of a wound that would kill him over time if he didn't address it but wasn't going to drop him in the next 10 minutes. He stayed on one knee. Jesse would have heard them coming. Not self-cruelty, just fact. Jesse had that quality awareness of the edges of things, the peripheral shifts that signal something is about to change before it changes. He'd been the one who noticed. Caden had always been better at dealing with the crisis after it arrived. The sun pressed the back of his neck. He did not hear the horse until it stopped. She was already off the mare when he turned, standing 10 feet away, not rushing forward, not hanging back. The particular distance of someone who has learned to assess before committing close enough to help, far enough to retreat. The mare behind her was painted, dark patches on white or white on dark depending on angle. Patient animal, ears forward, watching Caden with the mild, evaluating curiosity of a horse that has learned not to waste alarm on things that don't require it. The woman was doing the same thing with her eyes. 24, he guessed, but the kind of face that hard outdoor living pushed past easy age categories. Dark hair loose from a braid that had given up partway through the day. Dressed practically not the performed practicality of someone playing at wilderness, but functional clothing chosen entirely for what worked. Leather canvas boots that had walked serious miles. A knife at her hip, another smaller one at her belt. A rifle on her back positioned for a draw under 2 seconds. Her eyes moved to his side, to his hand pressed against the wound, back to his face. She didn't flinch at the blood. She didn't perform concern either. She just looked at him the way you look at a situation you're deciding how to handle. How many came after you? No greeting, no preamble. 4 that shot, maybe more holding back. They follow you here. Ran a cut between the rock formations. Horses couldn't follow. She looked past him. Scanned in a pattern, not anxious, sweeping, methodical coverage the way surveillance looks when it's become instinct rather than decision. She took her time. He let her. How bad? She nodded at his side. Bullet ribs, not through the lung. You know that. I know what that sounds like. This isn't it. She held his gaze for another moment. Whatever she was calculating, threat assessment, cost assessment, something else entirely, it came out somewhere that led her to step forward and position herself on his left side. Up, she said, and gave him her shoulder. Not gently, efficiently. The way someone helps with a necessary physical task without making a production of it. He took the help. They moved. Her name was Sawati. He learned this 40 minutes later inside the cabin after she'd gotten him through the door and into the chair and lit the oil lamp and begun moving through the space with the purposeful efficiency of a person operating in their own domain. Not performing familiarity, actually familiar. Every surface was where she expected it to be. Every item had a specific location that she reached for without looking. She was Comanche. She had lived alone in this part of the Arizona Territory for nearly 3 years, since the autumn of 1875 when she'd come back from 3 days of hunting in the eastern canyons to find her family's camp reduced to ash and the specific silence that follows violence that has finished its work. She'd searched for months, asked questions where it was safe to ask, kept moving where it wasn't. Asked the questions in ways that didn't reveal too much about who was asking, because a young Comanche woman asking questions about an army incident was the kind of thing that made certain kinds of men very interested in very unhelpful ways. She found nothing, no bodies, no survivors, no official record that acknowledged anything worth acknowledging. Just the lingering evidence of what had happened, and the particular kind of absence that becomes its own presence when someone you love is simply gone from the world without the courtesy of a final certainty. She'd stopped searching, not because she'd accepted it. She would never use the word accepted about it. Because continuing to move without direction had become a way of avoiding the harder question of what to do next. And she was not a woman who avoided hard questions by choice. She would face the question of what to do next. She would do it from a fixed point rather than a moving one. She would think clearly. She'd found the cabin 8 months after. Old line camp built into a natural rock shelf in a way that made it invisible from the main trail unless you knew exactly where to look. She'd repaired it methodically over the course of several weeks, working on it the way she worked on everything without ceremony, with full attention, one problem at a time. The north wall, the door frame, the roof in 2 sections, the stove that needed clearing and new mortar around its base. She'd made it functional in the way of someone building a position rather than a home. Everything chosen for utility. Nothing wasted. Nothing decorative except her mother's blanket folded on the cot, because some things you keep not because they're practical, but because letting them go would cost something you couldn't afford to spend. She had not brought anyone here before. In 3 years, she'd helped people occasionally. She had her grandmother's voice in her head about that, about not walking past someone who needed help, but she'd helped them and moved on. Kept the cabin separate. Kept it hers. It was the one place in a very wide territory that belonged entirely to her, and she'd maintained that belonging carefully. Her grandmother had been very clear: the person who dies alone carries that loneliness with them wherever the dead go. Don't add to what the world already holds. She hadn't argued with her grandmother while her grandmother was alive. She couldn't seem to argue with her now. So, she'd helped him up. She'd gotten him on the horse. She'd brought him here. And now she stood at the shelf in the lamplight organizing her herb pouches while a stranger breathed carefully in the chair behind her, and she thought about what came next. The wound was manageable. Worse than she'd hoped. Better than she'd feared. She worked by lamplight. Heated water. Used the dried herbs her mother had taught her, those lessons so sharp in memory they still sometimes caught her off guard in the middle of using them. The memory arriving with the specific sensory quality of something that was learned through the hands rather than the mind. She heated the bone-handled knife, offered him the leather strap. He took it without comment, put it between his teeth, set his hands flat on the table. His body convulsed once when she worked in voluntary, not weakness, and she noted it and kept going. His breathing went ragged and came back controlled. He made no sound. When she finished the bandaging tight enough to support without constricting, she tied the last knot and stepped back. He sat there breathing. "You've done this before," he said finally. "My mother taught me." She began returning things to their places. Everything had a place. Keeping things in their places was something she held to when other things were less orderly. "I'm Caden," he said. "I know, you said it on the horse." She kept her back to him, organizing. 3 times. "I don't think you knew." "I don't remember that." "No, you wouldn't." She turned. "Sawati." The lamp flame moved in a draft from the gap between the door and its frame. She'd been meaning to fix that gap. It was on the list. The list had been growing faster than she was clearing it. She sat against the wall near the stove, knife on her knee, watching the door. He should sleep. She could see the blood loss pulling at him, the color of his face, the slight unsteadiness in his hands. His body was making its requirements very clear. He didn't sleep. Instead, he sat in this chair and looked at the lamp and was somewhere else entirely. She recognized that quality of absence. The way a person can be physically present and yet be standing in some other time in some other place, revisiting something that can't be changed but won't stop being revisited. She knew that country well. When he started talking, she didn't think he'd planned to. "My brother," he said, and stopped. She waited. "Jesse, he was 14 when we started working horses together. I was 16. Our father had land outside Prescott. Good land. Jesse had the real gift for horses, the kind where you understand what an animal is thinking before it does. I was good. He was something rarer than good." The stove ticked. The lamp held. There was a dispute. Grazing rights. It ran on for 2 seasons. The neighbors' cattle kept crossing the fence line. Our father kept pushing them back. One night it became something else. His voice had the flatness of something carried so long it had worn smooth. I remember raising my hands, trying to slow things down. I don't remember the order of what happened after that. Just Jesse standing next to me, and then not. He looked up, not at her, at something past the wall. "I've been moving since. 10 years. Got skilled at jobs that don't require you to matter to anyone." He stopped, seemed to hear himself from outside for a moment. "I don't know why I told you that." "Because it had nowhere else to go," she said. He looked at her then, actually at her. She met his eyes and didn't look away. "My mother and my sister," she said. 1875. I was hunting, 3 days out. Came back to—" She stopped, rebuilt the sentence. "I looked for a long time. I never found them." She let that sit in the room. "So yes," she said, "I know what it is to carry something." He nodded. The slow nod of a man who is being given something and recognizing it for what it is without quite knowing what to do with it yet. They sat in the particular silence of 2 kinds of grief, sharing a small space without trying to fix each other. The lamp burned. The stove ticked. Outside, the desert settled into its cold, patient night. After a while, she said, "Look at what you're carrying." He blinked, then understood she meant the envelope. He pulled it from his coat, the red wax seal mostly intact despite everything. The embossed mark of the General Land Office, Washington, D.C. He'd been paid not to open it. He broke the seal. He read it slowly. She watched his face rather than the paper. The face was more informative. First, the careful, neutral expression of a man parsing legal language, then a slight narrowing, then something that settled behind his eyes like a stone dropping into still water, deep, slow, changing the surface of everything above it. He read the second page, the third, set it down on the table and looked at her. "Federal land deed," he said. "South Gila River Basin, 40,000 acres, 23 named families, settlers. Been working that land for years." He paused. "If this gets registered at the Federal Land Office in Maricopa Wells, they own it outright. No more lease payments, no more road fees, no more anything." He stopped. "Galt, Aldrich Galt. He controls the South Gila Basin. Has for years. Every dollar those families pay in fees goes to him." She was already connecting it. "He loses everything if this gets registered," she said. "Every revenue stream he's built down there, gone. So he sends 4 men to kill the courier, and picks a courier," Caden said, "who nobody will ask about when he doesn't come back." He said it without self-pity, just placing it accurately. The kind of clear-eyed accounting that she understood because it was the only kind that was useful. She looked at him across the table. "You have to get it there," she said. "Yes. Not we, not yet." But she wasn't saying good luck either. She sat against the wall all night, listened to him finally sleep the breathing evening out, deepening the hitched quality, smoothing as his body took what it needed. She was glad. He'd needed it. Whatever came next would require more from him than he currently had, and he'd been running on stubbornness and blood loss for the better part of the afternoon, outside the desert at night. She knew its vocabulary now the way you know a language after years of immersion, not translating anymore, just thinking in it. Wind in the brittle bush fine, distant coyote high and brief fine. The cooling creak of old timbers as the temperature dropped expected the cabin making its usual adjustments to the night. She listened for what didn't belong. The desert at night was never fully silent. That was something people who didn't know it misunderstood. They heard the absence of human sound and called it silence. But there was nothing silent about it. It was full of information. It had its own constant conversation, and 3 years of living in it had taught her to hear that conversation well enough to know when something new entered it. She thought about her mother while she waited. Not deliberately, just the way her mother came sometimes in the quiet, specific memories unbidden, arriving with the particular clarity of things you didn't choose to think about because they were too real for choosing. Her mother teaching her the herbs, sitting cross-legged in the shade of a canyon wall, the leather pouches spread between them, her mother's hands demonstrating the way you worked with each plant as if the plant was a person and you needed to treat it with the respect due to someone older and wiser than yourself. This is what you do for infection. This for fever. This for a wound that is seeping rather than bleeding. Seeping means the body is trying to close, you help it, you don't fight it. She had used those lessons tonight on a stranger she'd found bleeding in the desert. She thought her mother would have approved. Her mother had had very strong opinions about leaving people in the desert. She thought about Lena. That was harder. She tried not to think about Lena in the quiet hours, because the quiet hours gave the thinking too much room. Lena at 14, argumentative, brilliant, infuriating her mother's favorite in the way she would have furiously denied being anyone's favorite. Lena, who had been the first one Sawati looked for when she came back from the hunting canyon to find what she found. She'd never found her. 3 years of not knowing was its own particular landscape. Not grief exactly. Grief was what you felt for someone you knew was gone. This was something else. The persistent uncertainty of a story without an ending, which was in some ways harder than the ending would have been. You couldn't put it down. It didn't finish. You carried it. Around midnight she heard it. Hooves on hardpan. 2 directions. Coordinated more than one rider making independent decisions, which meant organized, which meant this wasn't random. The specific patient movement of horses being walked deliberately slow by riders who wanted to stay quiet and hadn't quite achieved it. She moved to the window, pressed herself to the wall beside it, looked through the gap in the boarding at the moonlit ground outside, counted. 6, not 4, 6. Galt had sent more, which meant someone had reported back already, which meant a faster line of communication between the ambush site and Tucson than she'd assumed, which meant the situation had already moved past what she'd calculated when she brought Caden here. She looked at him, asleep in the chair, color better than it had been, breathing steady, the particular stillness of a man whose body had finally gotten what it needed and was making the most of the opportunity. She calculated. 6 riders positioned in a pattern that suggested waiting for light before moving. Attacking an enclosed position in full darkness was expensive, disorganized, loud, costly in ways that hired men preferred to avoid. They'd wait for dawn visibility. They had the patience of people who were confident they had time, which gave her hours. She sat back down, put her knife on her knee, made a plan. The plan as it took shape was not complicated, but it required timing, and it required the back route to be clear, and it required the mare to cooperate, all of which were things she could control to varying degrees and not at all respectively. The mare would cooperate. The mare always cooperated. Some animals understood the shape of a situation in ways that didn't require explanation. She sat and thought and listened, and the desert outside continued its conversation, and around 3 in the morning, somewhere far out on the flats, something that wasn't wind moved through the brittle bush, and she tracked it by sound alone until she was satisfied it was an animal and not a person. Not a person. She set her knife on her knee again. An hour before first light, she woke him. An hour before first light, she woke him. His hand was moving toward his hip before he was fully conscious. She noted this, approved of it. 6 outside, she said. They'll move at dawn. He was organizing information before she finished the sentence. Fast. The speed of someone who's made critical decisions under pressure often enough to have the process worn smooth. Back way out, he asked. Rock cut, 20 feet, opens on the far side of the formation. Horses can't follow. She was already moving as she said it. Water skin, the herb pouch. Her ammunition counted the night before. Her mother's blanket, she rolled it and tied it without pausing. He stood, tested his balance, accepted what he found. She handed him her spare pistol. He checked the cylinder with practiced hands and put it in his belt. She pulled the loose board aside at the back wall. Cold pre-dawn air came through. The smell of rock and the particular nothing smell of desert before the heat starts building. She went first. He followed. Outside, the sky was beginning its transition from black to something less absolute. The first pale suggestion of gray at the eastern edge. Not dawn yet. just the idea of it. The painted mare waited in the shadow of the rock formation where Sawati had left her. Patient, ears flicking once toward them as they appeared. She untied her, mounted, reached down. Caden took her hand, got himself up behind her with a grunt he suppressed most of. She felt him settle, felt his arm come around her waist, a functional necessity, nothing more but the first time in 3 years that another person's arm had been there. She didn't note this out loud, just clicked her tongue and moved. Behind them inside the cabin they'd just vacated, one of the 6 riders finally decided the light was sufficient and put his boot to the door. It swung open into an empty room. By then, the mare was already moving through the rock formations at the pace of someone who knows exactly where she's going. Sawati knew every canyon, every cut, every blind wash in a 5-mile radius, where the ground left prints, where it didn't, where horses could follow and where the terrain made that impossible. She guided them through it. Caden held on, didn't ask where they were going. He could feel in the quality of how she moved the horse that she knew. The canyon swallowed them at dawn. Open desert one moment. Then rock walls rising on both sides and the world narrowing to a corridor 20 feet wide, and the sound-changing hoofbeats bouncing off stone wind sharpened and funneled the whole acoustic landscape compressed into something close and urgent. Sawati knew this canyon too. She'd brought them north and west from the cabin, away from the Arroyo Seco route, away from the road to Maricopa Wells that Hale had outlined so helpfully and that 4, now 6 men had demonstrated was no longer safe to use. "How far does this run?" Caden asked. 3 miles, then a wider wash, then high ground. From the high ground we see anything following, and if something's already ahead, then we see it before it sees us. He didn't have a better plan. His ribs had opinions about the horse's gait. Loud, detailed opinions expressed every time the mare's footing varied. He breathed through it, filed it, kept his arm around Sawati's waist because letting go wasn't an option, and because if he was being honest with himself, which the pain was making it difficult not to be, the solid fact of her being there was the only certain thing in the current situation. Everything else was variable. She was not variable. 2 hours in, she stopped the mare without warning or explanation. Just stopped. He felt her go still before he understood why. The particular stillness of someone whose whole body has become an instrument pointed at a single source of information. He stopped breathing, listened. Wind, the mare's breathing, the distant complaint of a hawk above the rim. Then, hooves. Slow, deliberate. Above them on the canyon rim, not the floor. Someone riding the high edge. Someone who had guessed the canyon was the logical route and gotten there first. She held up 2 fingers, maybe 3. She turned the mare in one smooth pivot, back the way they'd come. He didn't argue. 200 yards back she found a side cut he hadn't noticed, a narrow slot between the canyon wall and a collapsed boulder formation. Wide enough for the mare sideways, not much wider. She dismounted, led the mare through. Caden followed. His ribs filed a formal complaint. He ignored it with the practice of the past several hours. The slot opened into a small rock pocket, 30 feet across, open to the sky. Invisible from the canyon floor or the rim above. They waited. The hoofbeats on the rim passed, searching, moved east, faded. Caden counted to 200 before exhaling fully. "They anticipated the canyon," he said. "Yes, someone told them, or they know this territory. Either way," she said, "the canyon isn't our route anymore." She was already studying the walls of the pocket, looking for the next move. He'd stopped in the past few hours, confusing her thinking with her hesitating. They looked similar from the outside. They were entirely different things. "There's a settlement," she said. 12 miles northeast. 7 families, off the main routes. They know me. They'll shelter us. They'll shelter me," she said carefully. "And what I bring." He understood the distinction. "1 night," he said. "1 night," she agreed. "You rest. I look at that wound again. Then we find a different way to Maricopa Wells." He almost argued. He was managing fine. She was right. He knew it. Arguing with right was a habit he'd been trying to break since Jesse demonstrated in the most permanent way possible that being wrong about a situation is expensive. "All right," he said. They rode northeast. The settlement was called Vander's Crossing by the people who lived there, and nothing at all by everyone else because nobody else acknowledged it existed. 7 families. Germans mostly, with one family named Peralta, who'd worked that stretch of land since before the territory changed hands. Modest houses. Serious irrigation. The kind of community built by people who understood that survival required cooperation. Cooperation required trust, and trust required time, and who had put in the time. A woman came to the door of the nearest house as they rode in just before dusk. 50 or so. Strong hands. The face of someone who has seen hard things and stopped being undone by them. She looked at Sawati, at Caden, at the blood-stiffened fabric of his shirt. "Trouble following you?" she asked. "At a distance," Sawati said. "Far enough, for now." "Come inside." Her name was Marta Vander. Her husband's family had built the first house here 14 years ago. Her husband had died of fever 6 years back, and she'd stayed because this was her land. Not on any official document, she had no official document, but hers in every way that mattered to a woman who'd given 14 years of her life to a piece of ground. She fed them without drama. Bread, beans, dried meat. Caden ate without tasting, which was the right approach given that eating was necessary, whether or not it was pleasant. Afterward, Sawati changed his bandage at the kitchen table, while Marta sat across from him with the calm attention of a woman who has seen hard things and stopped being undone by them. "You're the courier," Marta said, not a question. He looked at her. She almost smiled. A wounded man. An envelope inside his coat. 6 riders in the territory. She folded her hands on the table. "My name is on that document?" He stared. "Marta Vander," she said. 40 acres, South Gila Basin Eastern Section. I've been paying Galt's road fee for 11 years. $5 a month for the right to use the only road that gets my goods to market." She said it flatly. Just a woman stating a fact. $660. For ground that was never legally his. Caden looked down at his coat. "You knew about the grant." "A man from Washington came through last spring, asked questions, measured land, wrote things down." She paused. "I noticed that Galt got very quiet after that. Men like Galt get loud when something doesn't matter and quiet when something does." Sawati finished the new bandage and stepped back. Her shoulders settled slightly, the small indicator he'd learned to read as things going as well as they could. $660, Caden said, "and counting." "Every month," Marta said, "every single month." He sat with that. 23 families. Similar stories, similar numbers. The kind of money that didn't seem catastrophic in any individual month, but which added up year over year to the difference between getting ahead and never quite arriving there. The difference between owning something real and perpetually renting it from a man who had no legitimate claim. And Galt had decided the solution to losing all of that was to make sure the envelope didn't arrive. Which meant Caden bleeding in a small settlement while 6 hired men circled the territory was currently the most consequential and most inconvenient person in the South Gila Basin. He found this darkly funny in a way he was too tired to fully express. "Sleep," Sawati said, from the doorway. "Real sleep, not the chair kind. I'm managing." "I know you're managing. Manage in a bed." Marta was already standing, lamp in hand, leading the way. Caden followed. He was asleep before he finished deciding whether to stay awake. While he slept, Sawati worked. She did not sleep. She had not planned to sleep. She sat at Marta's kitchen table after the household had gone quiet. Marta to her room, the 2 children who lived in the adjacent house to theirs, the settlement settling into the particular stillness of a place where people rise early and go to bed early because the land requires both. And she thought through the shape of the problem, not as she wanted it to be, as it was. 6 riders last counted. Multiple routes to Maricopa Wells now covered or anticipated. A relay station at Gila Crossing that had been burned. She didn't know this yet, but she'd heard enough about Galt's operational thoroughness in the past 18 hours to suspect that he wouldn't leave a communication line intact if he could help it. Galt himself, who had the patience and the resources of a man who had been playing this particular kind of game for 12 years. And upstairs, a man with a wound that was stable but not healed, carrying a document that needed to arrive at a specific place within a shrinking number of days, who had been selected for this job specifically because he had nobody watching out for him. He'd had nobody watching out for him. Past tense. She sat with that for a moment, examined it carefully. Not the sentiment of it, she wasn't particularly interested in sentiment, but the practical reality of what it meant for how she was thinking about the problem. Because the way you think about a problem changes depending on whether you're thinking about it alone or thinking about it as one of two. She'd been thinking alone for 3 years. She was not, she realized, thinking alone anymore. That was a change worth acknowledging, and worth acting on. She got up from the table and went out to the barn. Kern was the settlement's rider, a man of 30, lean and fast, who moved between the 7 family settlements in this part of the territory and knew every trail and water source and shortcut within 3 days' ride. She'd known him for 2 years. had helped his family once with a sick horse and once with something harder, and he'd remembered both. She trusted him in the specific calibrated way she trusted anyone based on what she'd observed, not what she'd been told. He was sleeping in the hayloft as he usually did when he overnighted at the crossing. He woke when she climbed up hand going for his belt before he recognized her in the darkness. "Sawati," settling back. "What's wrong?" "Nothing yet," she said. "I need you to ride tonight." She gave him a message, carefully composed. A road, a timeline, a destination. Granite Field, the land office there 3 nights from now. What the document was, whose names were on it. "Tell whoever will come," she said. "Tell them the courier is alive. Tell them what they're owed." Kern looked at her for a long moment. "That's Galt's town." "I know what it is. Going there to file against Galt in Galt's town." "I know what it is," she said again. Not impatient, just clear. "And I know that the families whose names are on that document have been paying Galt for 11 years for something that was legally theirs all along. Tell them that. Let them decide." Kern studied her face in the dark of the hayloft. Whatever he found there, the steadiness, the absence of anything he could read as doubt, he gave a short nod. "I'll ride in an hour," he said. "Let my horse breathe first." 1 hour, she agreed. She climbed back down. She sat at Marta's kitchen table for the rest of the night. Not sleeping. Not anxious exactly, just alert in the way of someone who has set something in motion and is waiting to see what motion looks like when it arrives. She thought about her grandmother. Her grandmother had said many things, had been in fact a woman who believed that wisdom was meant to be spoken, not kept, but the thing she said most often, the thing that Sawati had heard so many times, it had become less a statement than a texture of the way she understood the world was. This people have more courage than they think they do. What they lack is not courage. What they lack is the moment that makes the courage necessary. Give them the moment, her grandmother said. The rest takes care of itself. Sawati had given them the moment. Now she waited for morning and for whatever morning was going to bring. Section 15. He woke to voices. Low, urgent. From the main room. The window showed gray pre-dawn light. He'd slept the full night. His body felt like it had been given an unexpected gift and hadn't figured out what to do with it yet. His ribs were still there, still had opinions. But the violent pulsing heat of the day before had settled into something more workable, more like a serious inconvenience than an active emergency. Sawati's herbs doing what they were supposed to do. He moved to the door. In the main room, Sawati and a man he didn't recognize, early 30s, trail-dusted, holding a hat in both hands, the way people hold hats when they have bad news and are using the hat as something to do with their hands. "This is Kern," Sawati said. "He rides between the settlements. He came through an hour ago." The man Caden hadn't noticed before. Different man. Kern looked at his hat. "There was a man of the Redstone Post 2 nights ago," Kern said. "Rode in fast. The man who runs the post, he was already there, already talking to Galt's men." Cold moved through Caden that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Hale," he said. "Don't know his name. But they rode out southeast right after. Not north. Southeast, not the direction you'd go if you were still looking for someone who ran north." Caden looked at Sawati. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has already done the arithmetic and is waiting to see if you'll arrive at the same answer. He arrived. Hale panicked, he said. Not surprised. Disappointed in himself for not having anticipated it. He rode to Galt to try to stay safe. Told them I was alive, told them I went north. "And now they cover all the northern routes," Sawati said, including the direct road to Maricopa Wells. "The relay station at Gila Crossing," Caden said. "I can send a message ahead." Kern, Sawati said. Kern turned the hat. "The station at Gila Crossing. There was smoke yesterday afternoon. By evening it was—" He looked for the right word, found a blunt one. "Gone." Caden stared. "Burned," Sawati said, for clarity. The relay station at Gila Crossing was the only communication point between the northern settlements and the federal offices at Maricopa Wells. No station meant no advance warning. No advance warning meant arriving at the destination as a surprise, which in the current circumstances was the same as arriving vulnerable. Galt had closed the road and burned the bridge. "Who does that?" Caden said, not really asking anyone. "Who burns a federal relay station?" "A man who believes he won't be held accountable for it," Sawati said. That was the truest thing anyone had said in 2 days. They left Vander's Crossing before noon. Marta pressed food on them. Dried meat bread wrapped in cloth. A small jar of something preserved with instructions for use if the wound got worse. She gave these instructions matter-of-factly, the way she said everything, as though preparing for things to get worse was simply reasonable planning. At the door, she looked at Caden. "Get it there," she said. "Not please, not I hope you make it, just get it there. The way you say something when you're entrusting someone with what you can't protect yourself." He nodded. She closed the door. They rode west, then south, looping wide around the expected routes. Sawati navigated without referring to anything external, a particular angle of rock, a dry wash, bending a certain way, the vegetation changing at the edge of an underground water source. Landmarks that weren't landmarks to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years learning to read this ground. He watched her do it, not because watching was useful, because it was, and he recognized this would be difficult to explain to anyone who asked one of the most reassuring things he'd seen in a long time. Someone who knew something completely, who moved through their knowledge without hesitation or display, who had built competence through necessity and then gone past necessity into something that looked almost like ease. Jesse had had that quality with horses. He thought about Jesse without the usual weight between himself and the memory. Just the fact of who his brother had been. The thought arrived cleanly, and he noted this and filed it somewhere. They'd been riding 2 hours when he said, "Tell me about your sister." Sawati's shoulders tightened. Barely, but he was close enough now to catch it. "Why?" "Because you know about Jesse." Feels uneven. Long pause. The mare's hooves on dry ground. Wind from the west carrying the smell of nothing for miles. "Her name was Lena," Sawati said. 14 when... She stopped, rebuilt it. She was 14. She liked difficult things, puzzles, questions with more than one right answer. She used to argue with my mother about everything. A pause. Not to be difficult, because she thought arguing carefully was how you found out what was actually true. "Smart," Caden said. "Stubborn," Sawati said. Then quieter, "Yes, smart." He didn't say "I'm sorry." She hadn't said it to him either, and he'd understood that as respect, the acknowledgement that some things don't get smaller when you apply words to them. "You've been looking for her," he said. Not a question. "I looked for a long time," she said. "I found nothing, which means I don't know." Not knowing is its own kind of, "Yes," she said. Just that. Cutting it off not harshly, but with the tone of someone who doesn't need the sentence completed because they live inside it. He understood. They rode in silence for a while after that. But it was a different silence than before. The kind that exists between people who have handed each other something real and are letting it settle. Section 17. They stopped in the shade of a rock overhang to rest the mare and think. Caden spread the map Marta had given them, hand-drawn, rough but accurate, in the way of something made by people who actually worked the land on the ground between them. Sawati sat cross-legged opposite, eating without looking at the food, her eyes moving between the map and the surrounding terrain. "Granite Field," he said. "She found it. Galt's town," she said. "His main operation. Office contracts money. But it's also where the territorial law office is. A circuit judge there. If we can't reach Maricopa Wells..." Maricopa Wells is the federal registrar. Granite Field is territorial. Different jurisdictions. A territorial judge still has to recognize a federal land grant, and Galt's corruption is careful private arrangements, leverage debt. He doesn't visibly break law because visible law-breaking creates records. Records create problems. Sawati was quiet. "You're saying," she said slowly, "that going to Granite Field straight into Galt's territory might be safer than going around. The last place he expects us is his own town. The one thing he can't do openly is prevent illegal filing in front of witnesses." "That's either very smart," she said, "or the kind of plan that sounds smart because the alternatives are worse." "It's both," he said honestly. She looked at the map for a long time, then folded it and handed it back. "There are 2 canyon passes between here and Granite Field," she said. "Both could be watched. We move at night. If they're covering the Maricopa Wells routes, then Granite Field might be open." They looked at each other across the small space of the overhang. He noticed in the specific way that exhaustion and proximity and pain tend to produce honesty that he trusted her. Not the cautious, provisional trust of someone waiting for confirmation. Real trust. The kind built fast in circumstances that don't allow for slow construction. He didn't say this. She would have found it unnecessary. But he thought it. And possibly she knew because she looked at him for a moment with something in her expression that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite not one. Then she looked away. "Rest another hour," she said. "Then we ride." They were 2 miles from the first canyon pass when the mare stopped. Not a nervous stop. A full halt, ears pinned back, nostrils wide, weight shifting backward. An animal that has found something its rider hasn't processed yet. Sawati was off and moving forward before Caden registered the reason. 20 yards down the trail, crouching, he dismounted, followed. His ribs registered their ongoing position on sudden movements. The man was partially hidden by brush off the trail. Alive, breathing, but unconscious. Middle-aged. Trail clothes. Head wound. Not from a fall. From something deliberate and recent. Sawati checked him quickly, then checked his jacket, the inside pocket. She went still. He crouched beside her. She pulled out what she'd found, a folded paper. Regular paper, not official stock, folded twice. Opened it. Her jaw tightened. She handed it to him without speaking. A list. Settlement names. Routes. Vander's Crossing. 2 others. And at the bottom, in different handwriting, added hastily 2 words. North Canyon. Someone in Vander's Crossing, Caden said. Yes, her voice was controlled. He felt the coldness of it. Not Marta. He was certain of not Marta. But 7 families meant 7 different calculations about how to stay safe, and Galt had had 11 years to make himself someone people in this territory were afraid to oppose. They'll be watching the North Canyon, Sawati said. Yes, and the South Pass is the longer way. He looked at her. She looked at him. Everything that didn't need saying didn't get said, the wound, the deadline, the systematic way in which every easier option kept closing. South Pass, Caden said. South Pass, she agreed. Sawati took the paper, burned it on a flat rock with a match, let the ash blow. No evidence of what they knew. No evidence of which way they'd gone. They remounted and turned south. The South Pass was harder than hard. Rocky ground that required the mare to pick her way with painful deliberateness, testing each step before committing to it, doing the work of a horse that has been in difficult terrain long enough to understand that speed is not the primary virtue here. Narrow sections where the walls came close enough that Caden had to swing his leg forward to avoid scraping. Twice the passage descended steeply enough that they had to dismount and lead the mare down by hand, both feet on uncertain ground, both hands on the reins, the slope fighting them every foot of the way. Caden's ribs made the descents an exercise in controlled suffering. He did not complain. Sawati did not offer sympathy. What she did, and he noticed it and said nothing, because noting it out loud would have made it different, was position herself on his right side on the steep sections. Close enough to catch him if his footing went. Not making a production of it. Just being in the location that would be useful if needed. It was not needed, but it was noticed. And it was the kind of thing you noticed and filed in a particular place, the place where you put things that mattered and that you weren't ready to do anything about yet. The South Pass took nearly 4 hours. When they came out the far end into a wide valley, Caden recognized from Marta's map the light was already thinking about afternoon. 8 miles to Granite Field, give or take. Too far to arrive in daylight if they timed it right. They found cover in a dry creek bed lined with scrubby cottonwoods that provided more shade than they looked capable of. The mare found the seep at the bend. Without being led to it, she'd smelled the water from 50 yards back and walked to it with the purposeful patience of an animal that has learned to take its opportunities when they present themselves. Good horse. Sawati had saved her life 2 years ago, and the mare had apparently decided this created an obligation. Or maybe she just liked the company. It was difficult to know with horses which of those things was true. They ate the last of Marta's bread in silence, drank carefully from the water skin. Caden checked the envelope inside his coat, real intact, the red wax broken where he'd opened it, but the document itself undamaged by 4 days of desert and blood and hard riding. Heavy paper, federal stock. The kind of thing built by people who understood that important documents needed to survive difficult journeys. He'd been checking it periodically since the first morning. Not because he thought it would be gone, there was nowhere for it to go, but because the checking had become something else. A reminder. 23 families. Marta Vander and 11 years of monthly payments. The weight of something that mattered resting in his coat alongside his heartbeat. The light changed. The long shadows of late afternoon. The slow bronze of the sky doing what it did as evening approached in the desert, not dimming exactly, more like deepening the colors, going richer and more specific as the day ran out. He thought about Jesse. This had been happening more often. Not the grinding, obligatory guilt of the first years after Prescott, the thought that arrived like a debt collector with a ledger that never balanced, but something more like memory, clean and specific. Jesse as he'd actually been, not Jesse as the placeholder for everything Caden felt he owed. He thought about what Jesse would say if he could see this particular situation. dusty and wounded, waiting in a dry creek bed in the Arizona Territory, 8 miles from a confrontation with a man who'd been trying to have him killed for 4 days, sitting next to a woman he'd known for 3 days and trusted completely. Jesse would have been enthusiastic in a completely misguided way. He'd had a high tolerance for being in over his head. Thought it was good for a person. Thought being in over your head was how you found out what you were actually made of, which Caden had always considered reckless romanticism right up until the moment he wasn't sure anymore. "You're smiling," Sawati said. He hadn't known he was. "Thinking about my brother." She looked at him. "He would have liked this," Caden said. "The situation, in a completely misguided way. The being shot part or the everything after. All of it. He had a high tolerance for being in over his head. He thought it was good for a person." Sawati considered this with the seriousness she gave everything. Was he right? Caden looked at the envelope. At the direction of Granite Field, 8 miles in the gathering dark. "Ask me again in 2 days," he said. Something shifted in her expression, the immediate predecessor to a smile. The moment just before a thing happens, before the face decides whether to let it through. She looked away before it arrived. "Time to move." She stood, checked the mare, checked her weapons with the practiced inventory of someone for whom that check had become as automatic as breathing. Not anxious, not ceremonial, just thorough. He stood too. His ribs filed their final formal objection of the evening and were noted and overruled. "Caden," she said. He looked at her. Night was coming in. The way it comes in desert country, not gradually but decisively, the decision of darkness arriving all at once. Her face in the last of the light. The steady evaluating gaze that he'd spent 4 days learning was not coldness, but its opposite, the full attention of someone who takes things seriously and doesn't pretend otherwise. "Whatever happens in Granite Field," she said, "you are not alone in it." He held her gaze. He thought about 10 years of arranging a life around the careful, deliberate absence of responsibility for another person. The way it starts to feel like safety, like the reasonable conclusion to have drawn from a specific kind of pain, and then so slowly you don't notice the transition starts to feel like nothing at all. He thought about Sawati at that window, all night, listening. Not because she had to, not because anyone had asked, because she'd made a decision about this specific man in this specific situation, and her decisions once made were not provisional. "I know," he said. 2 words, both of them entirely true. She nodded once, turned to the mare. They rode into the dark together, 8 miles to Granite Field, 8 miles to whatever came next. And they were riding toward it rather than away from it, which was, Caden understood this as clearly as he'd understood anything in a long time what the whole thing had always been about. The stars came out, full and clear. Just light that had traveled a very long way to get here, which was more than enough. Granite Field at midnight looked like a town pretending to sleep. Curtains drawn, lamps out. The main street empty in the specific way of a place that has learned to make itself small when certain kinds of trouble are present. Not the natural quiet of a settlement at rest. The held-breath quiet of people who've decided that seeing less is how you survive more. Caden felt it the moment they crossed into town. Wrong kind of silence. Sawati felt it too. Her hand tightened on the reins barely, but he was close enough now to catch it. "They know someone is coming," she said. "Not necessarily us specifically. Galt owns this town. He owns the dead of this town," she said. "Different thing." The mare picked her way down the center of the street. Quiet as possible. Every window stayed dark. Every door stayed closed. But twice Caden caught the slight shift of a curtain, a face at the edge gone before he could identify it. Someone watching. Someone who hadn't entirely extinguished their curiosity, even in a town where curiosity had proven expensive. The land office sat at the end of the main street. 2-story, stone foundation. The most permanent structure in Granite Field, built to outlast what surrounded it. A single lamp burned in the ground floor window. Someone was awake inside, at midnight, waiting. Sawati tied the mare not to the land office post, but to the post in front of the hardware store 20 feet further. Better angle on the side alley, retreat path. Always thinking about retreat paths. He straightened, pressed his hand over the envelope one last time, inside his coat. Real. There. 4 days of desert and ambush, and it was still there. "Ready," he said. "I was ready when you were face down in the arroyo," she said. He almost laughed. Almost. They walked to the land office door. The inside smelled like paper and tobacco and the accumulated weight of important decisions made in a small room over many years. A single lamp on the main desk. A long counter along the back wall lined with ledgers. And behind the counter, behind the desk, A man. 50. Desk soft. Hair slicked. Shirt too neat for midnight. The face of someone who had prepared to be here, who had dressed for it. Desmond Pruitt, the territorial registrar for Gila County. The man whose signature on a registration form would make everything official. Except Pruitt was not alone, against the far wall, standing completely still, the way a man stands when he has decided he is in charge of a room and doesn't need to prove it through movement. Aldrich Galt. Caden stopped walking. His body simply stopped, processing what it was seeing, the full weight of it arriving with the cold completeness of water filling a boot. He knew, not guessed, not positioned men at multiple locations in case, knew, was here, waiting. Sawati had stopped too, one step behind Caden's left shoulder. The room was very quiet. Galt looked at Caden the way a man looks at a problem he's been thinking about for 4 days and is now finally able to address directly. No anger, no theater. The calm attention of someone who has been patient and is now at the end of patience in the most dangerous possible way. "Mr. Rourke," he said. Voice not loud, not rough. The voice of a man who had never needed to raise it because the people around him had always understood that his quietness was more dangerous than shouting. "Sit down," Galt said. "Both of you." Neither of them sat. Galt looked at this without surprise, moved to the desk, sat himself with the deliberate ease of a man making a point through posture, placed his hands flat on the surface, no weapons visible, which meant weapons somewhere Caden couldn't see. "You're harder to kill than I planned for," Galt said. Almost a compliment. Almost. "Hale told me you were practical, not persistent." "Hale was wrong about some things," Caden said. "Hale is wrong about most things. That's why he owes me money." Galt's eyes moved to Sawati, measured her, returned to Caden. "I know why you're here. The document." He nodded toward Caden's coat. "You want Pruitt to register it." "That's right," Caden said. "The problem," Galt said with the tone of a teacher explaining something to a student who should have understood sooner, "is that Pruitt doesn't accept documents from men with active warrants." He reached into his jacket, placed a paper on the desk, slid it forward. Caden didn't move toward it, but he could see enough from where he stood. Official form, territorial seal, his name, the words "suspected theft of federal materials." There it is. The move he hadn't seen coming. Not because it wasn't logical in retrospect, it was entirely logical, the most Galt move imaginable, but because it required a level of preparation that assumed Caden would get this far. Which meant Galt had prepared for failure. Had anticipated that 4 men at Arroyo Seco and 6 men at the cabin and burning the relay station might not be enough. A man carrying a document without authorization could be detained. The document held as evidence. The filing delayed indefinitely while authorization was investigated, and investigations in Galt's territory took exactly as long as Galt needed them to take. "You're smart," Caden said. "Yes," Galt agreed, without false modesty. "I've spent 12 years building something stable. The families in the South Gila Basin have roads because of me, water access because of me, market connections because of me. At a price? Everything has a price. That's not corruption. That's economics." 11 years of monthly payments, Caden said. $660 from one family, times 23. Something moved in Galt's expression. Not guilt. The acknowledgement of a number that sounds different when stated plainly than it does when distributed across months and years, and the abstraction of fees. "Sit down," Galt said again. "No." Silence. The lamp flame moved. Then from outside, a sound, muffled. Boot on wood, the creak of a porch board taking weight. One person, then 2. Then the sound of more than 2, not going away. Galt heard it. His eyes moved to the window, then back to Caden. Something shifted in the room. The door opened, not kicked in, not burst. Opened the way a door opens when the person on the other side has a right to open it and knows it and is not in any hurry, because the decision has already been made, and decisions once made don't require speed. Marta Vander came through first. Caden stared. Behind her a man he didn't know. A woman. 2 more men, one older, moving carefully with the gait of someone for whom physical effort costs something now but who has decided the cost is worth it. Another woman. Then 4 more in the doorway, crowding, not quite all fitting through at once. 9 people. From Vander's Crossing, in Granite Field, at midnight. How? That was the first thought, immediately followed by Sawati. He turned to look at her. She was watching Marta with an expression that contained very carefully something that might have been the satisfaction of a plan that had worked. "You sent them ahead," he said, "when I slept. "I sent Kern with a message," she said. "I told him which road we'd take, when we'd arrive, and I told him to bring whoever was willing." "You planned this." "I planned for the possibility," she said. "There's a difference." He thought about her sitting awake at Marta's kitchen table. The long habit of someone who has spent 3 years surviving alone, always thinking past the current moment, always preparing for the version of things that goes wrong, always having a retreat path. Except this time the retreat path went forward. Galt had not moved from his chair. But something had changed in the quality of his stillness, the kind that comes from rapid internal recalculation. Marta walked to the counter, placed her hands on the wood, looked at Pruitt with the direct, unhurried gaze of a woman who has been underestimated by men for 40 years and is thoroughly done with it. "Desmond," she said. Pruitt looked up from his ledger. "You know who I am. You know who every person standing behind me is. You've taken our registration fees for 11 years. She paused. "You're going to register this document." Pruitt's mouth opened, closed. He looked at Galt. "Desmond," Galt said, very quiet. Pruitt looked back at Marta, at the 8 people behind her, at Sawati standing with her hand near her knife, expression perfectly calm, at Caden, who had not sat down and was not going to sit down, looking at Galt with the focus of a man who has decided what he's willing to spend. Pruitt looked at his ledger. The moment stretched. The door opened again. The room, which had already exceeded its capacity for unexpected developments, somehow found room for one more. Brixton Hale looked terrible. 4 days of it showed in every line of his face. The careful, controlled expression from Redstone was gone. In its place, the face of a man who has made a series of decisions he knew were wrong while making them, and has now run out of road on which to avoid the consequences. He was holding something, a ledger, smaller than Pruitt's. The trading post accounts from Redstone Caden could see the trail dust on it, the wear of a saddlebag across hard miles. Hale had ridden here, carrying this. He walked to the center of the room, did not look at Galt, set the ledger on Pruitt's counter. 3 years, he said. His voice was not steady. He wasn't trying to make it steady. 3 years of payments, every transaction, every instruction. Who told me which routes to use? Who told me which couriers to hire? Who told me which ones didn't need to come back? The room was absolutely still. "The courier before Rourke," Hale said. "Man named Pellet. 2 years ago. I told him the same route, the same story about a quiet road." He stopped, swallowed. "I never heard from him again." No one spoke. "I didn't know for certain," he said. "That's what I told myself. I didn't know for certain." He looked up, finally looked at Galt. "I knew 2 days ago when you told me to get out of the territory, when you said you were burning Gila Crossing, and I understood what that meant." He paused. "A man's got to stop somewhere," he said. "I stopped here. Not heroic, not a speech, just a man saying I stopped here. This is the line. It's late. But it's the line." Caden looked at Galt. Something was happening in Galt's face, the recalculation going past what arithmetic could solve. The specific moment when a man who has operated for 12 years behind the shield of other people's fear encounters enough people who have simultaneously tonight stopped being afraid. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing. It wasn't a crack or a crumble or any of the large gestures the scale of 12 years might seem to demand. It was just a man in a chair, without the architecture of control that had always surrounded him, without the levers, without the mechanisms. Just a man, in a room full of people he had spent years making small, who had decided tonight to be larger. "Pruitt," Caden said. The registrar looked at him. "Register the document." Pruitt looked at Galt one final time. Galt said nothing, which was finally its own kind of answer. Pruitt opened his ledger, reached for his pen. It took 11 minutes, Caden counted. Not because the time mattered legally once the pen moved, once Pruitt's signature went on the registration form alongside the federal seal. The thing was done, but because 11 minutes was the length of the longest wait of his life, and he needed to put a number on it. Sawati stood at his shoulder the entire time, not watching Pruitt, watching the room, watching Galt, watching the door. The full attention of someone who knows that the moment of completion is also the moment of maximum vulnerability. When Pruitt blotted the ink and set down his pen, the sound was very small. A pen on a desk, nothing dramatic. But Marta Vander at the counter made a sound. Just one. A single breath released, like something held for 11 years had finally found permission to come out. The man behind her, the older one who'd moved carefully, put his hand on her shoulder. She covered it with hers. Caden looked at the registration form. His name, the document number, the date, Pruitt's signature, the territorial seal. Done. He looked at Galt. Galt stood slowly, the deliberate movements of a man making sure no gesture could be misread. He straightened his jacket, picked up the warrant from the desk, the one with Caden's name on it, and folded it, put it in his pocket. "This isn't over," he said. "It's registered," Caden said. "That part's over. I have lawyers, contacts in the territorial government. You have a ledger on that counter?" Caden said, nodding toward Hale's account book. 3 years of written instructions, and a room full of witnesses. Galt looked at the ledger, at the room, at the 8 people who were not going to change their minds about what they had witnessed tonight. "Lawyers take time," Caden continued. "Contacts take time. And time," he paused, "time is the one thing you don't have as much of as you used to." A long silence. Then Galt walked to the door, opened it, did not look back. The night outside received him, and that was the end of Aldrich Galt's presence in this story. Not with a gun going off or a dramatic confession or any of the large gestures that 12 years of harm might seem to require. Just a door, opening, closing. A man walking out into the dark, leaving behind a room full of people he had made small for years, who were right now standing at full height. The room exhaled. Marta sat down in the chair Galt had occupied and put her face in her hands. Not crying, just the physical form that an 11-year tension takes when it finally has permission to leave a body. Hale stood by the counter, holding his hat the same way he'd held it at Redstone in both hands, but without the guilty press of lips. Just standing, waiting to find out what he was now. Caden looked at him. "Pellet," Caden said. Hale closed his eyes. "Yes." "You don't know for certain?" "No." "Then you carry that uncertainty, and you figure out what to do with it, day by day." A pause. "That's the only option there is." Hale opened his eyes. Something in them, not relief, not forgiveness, nothing as clean as either of those, but the particular look of a man who has been handed a harder version of what he wanted, which was still better than nothing. He nodded, once. Sawati was beside Caden now. Not touching, just there. "It's done," she said. "Most of it. The part that needed doing tonight." He looked at her. The lamp casting its limited circle of yellow light over the room. Over Marta. Over the settlers. Over Hale. Over Pruitt, who had retreated to the farthest end of his counter and was attempting to look like furniture. "You sent that message before you knew if it would work," he said. "I sent it because it might work," she said. "There's a difference. You trusted them. I trusted that people who have enough reason will find enough courage when the moment is specific enough." She turned to look at him. "Your plan was to walk in and file the paper. That was the whole plan. It was a good plan. It needed more than one person to execute it." He held her gaze. "About the version of tonight that would have happened without the 9 people from Vander's Crossing filling the doorway. Without Hale and his ledger arriving at the precise moment they arrived. Without Sawati's foresight operating during the hours he'd been unconscious in Marta's spare room. The version where Caden Rourke walked into this office alone, with a warrant outstanding, against a man who owned the registrar. He would have been detained. The document held. Galt would have had breakfast in the morning and continued collecting his fees. "I would have failed," he said. "Not self-pity, just accuracy." "You would have tried," she said, "which is different." A pause. "But yes, alone." "Sawati," she waited. "Thank you," said plainly, without decoration, the way you say something when you mean it entirely and performance would only get in the way. Not just for the arroyo, for all of it. She was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother said don't let people die alone," she said. "She said die." "Yes, you extended it." She looked at him with that expression, the not quite smile, the immediate predecessor. "You were worth extending it for," she said. He looked at the floor, at the lamp, at his hands. Then he looked at her. "Jesse would have liked you," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "He would have tried to race you. Horses. First thing he raced everyone. He was always trying to find someone who could beat him." He paused. "He never did." "I would have beaten him," Sawati said. Simply, completely certain. He laughed, not carefully managed, not partial, a real one, full and unguarded and slightly surprised by itself. Sawati watched him, and this time the not quite smile arrived. Brief, real, the kind that doesn't perform itself but simply happens because the internal weather shifted and the face reported it honestly. Then it was gone. But it had been there. They left Granite Field before dawn. The settlers stayed paperwork to sign copies to make the slow bureaucratic machinery of official recognition to set in motion. Marta would handle it. with the specific competence of a woman who has managed every aspect of a working settlement for 14 years and finds administrative processes significantly less intimidating than most people do. Hale stayed too. That surprised Caden. He'd expected Hale to disappear to take the window of the night's chaos and slip away somewhere that didn't know his name. Instead, he stood by the counter with his ledger, waiting for the territorial marshal that Pruitt had sent a rider for, motivated by the specific calculation of a man who has witnessed enough tonight to understand which side of history he wants to be on, waiting for the accounting of what the ledger contained, for whatever came after. Caden paused at the door on his way out. Hale looked at him. "Pellet," Caden said. "If you find out for certain either way, it matters that the truth is known, even if it's just a name on a record." Hale looked at the ledger. "I know," he said. That was enough. Outside, Granite Field was beginning to think about morning. The sky in the east carrying that particular pre-light quality, not dark anymore, not bright yet. Something honest about the fact that transitions are real states and not just the brief space between more important ones. The mayor waited at the post. Patient. Endlessly patient. Caden stood at the edge of the porch. His ribs acknowledged the night's events. He acknowledged them back with more patience than he'd managed in 4 days. They'd held together when he'd needed them to. They'd earned acknowledgement. Sawadi came to stand beside him. They stood there for a moment. Granite Field around them. Still quiet. Still holding the particular silence of a place that has witnessed something and hasn't figured out yet what it means for tomorrow. Windows still dark. Doors still closed. But different. The held breath quality was gone. What replaced it wasn't loud, wasn't celebratory, just a kind of settling the sound of something that had been wrong for a long time, beginning very slowly to consider being different. "What happens to Galt?" she asked. "He'll fight it," Caden said. "Lawyers, contacts. He won't go quietly, but he'll fight in courts, in daylight, with witnesses and records." He paused. Before he operated in the gaps, in the dark between official things. Now there's a record. And Hale's ledger. He stopped. 3 years of written instructions in Galt's own hand, sent to someone he was certain he controlled completely. Another pause. The certainty of your own power is the most dangerous thing you can have. Makes you careless. She was quiet. Then, the families in the South Gila Basin own their land now. "Yes," he said, "on the territorial record. That's..." He thought about how to say it. "That's the thing that was worth doing." She turned to look at him. He turned to look at her. The pre-light growing around them. Gray and honest. "The valley," he said. "The one north of here. Good water. Quiet." He said it plainly without making it larger than it was or smaller. "I mean to go there, not to pass through, to stay. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm done drifting." She held his gaze. "Your sister," he said. "Lena, I know you never stopped." "I never stopped looking," she said. Quiet. Precise. "I stopped moving without direction. That's different." A pause. "If she's alive, if there's anything to find, I'll find it better from a place than from nowhere." He nodded. She looked at the street, at the mare, at the eastern sky lightening by degrees. "The valley," she said. "Yes, you've been there before. Passed through years ago. Good land, quiet people. The kind of place that doesn't ask too much of you. That's a low bar. I've learned to appreciate a low bar." Something moved in her expression. Not the not-quite smile. Something different. Older. Something that had been there for a long time and was only now in this specific light visible. "I have nowhere else I need to be," she said. 7 words. Simple. Completely simple. And they landed in the center of Caden Rourke's chest with more force than the bullet had, because the bullet had only taken something away, and this was giving something back. He didn't say anything. Words were going to be insufficient. He offered his hand. She looked at it. Took it. One firm, brief grip. Then she let go and walked to the mare and freed the reins from the post with the efficient movements of someone with a direction to ride in. He followed, mounted with the assistance of his ribs, who complained bitterly and were informed this was no longer relevant, and settled behind her. She clicked her tongue. The mare moved, down the center of Granite Field's main street, past the closed doors, past the curtained windows, past the land office where a registration was drying in a ledger that would outlast everyone in this story, past the edge of town, into the open territory, the sky going from gray to the first pale suggestion of gold. They rode north. No urgency. The urgency was done. What remained was movement with purpose, which was an entirely different thing. The mare set her own pace and they let her. She was a sensible animal. She knew when the emergency was over. The land opened around them, high desert transitioning to something gentler as they gained elevation. Scrub giving way to juniper. Juniper giving way to the first ponderosa pines at the edge of high country. The smell changing, losing the dry mineral quality of desert and picking up something green, something that meant water. An hour north of Granite Field, Sawati said, "Tell me something about Jesse I don't know." He thought about it. He was afraid of birds, he said. She turned slightly, enough to see his profile. "Specifically birds," Caden said. "Not horses, not cattle, not rattlesnakes, any of the things a person working this country has every reason to fear. Birds." He paused. "A rooster got him when he was 5, left a scar." He touched his own cheek to show location. After that, he'd walk a full circle around a hen house rather than go straight past it. "Did he tell people?" "Nobody who would repeat it." "He told you." "I'm his brother." A pause. "I was his brother." The present tense shifting. The way it did sometimes. The way it did less often now than it had 4 days ago, which was something he noticed without knowing how to account for it yet. Sawati faced forward again. "Lena was afraid of horses," she said. "Which is yes, I know, for a Comanche girl." Something in her voice. The slight warmth of a memory that still had warmth in it that the loss hadn't fully leached out. Every animal in the world she was fine with. Snakes she would pick up. Horses made her... She made a small sound, almost a laugh. She said they were too big to trust. She wasn't wrong. She was completely right, but she never said it in public. He let it sit. Let the fact of their shared specific losses ride alongside them in the morning air. Not as weight, not as the grinding thing it had been for 10 years, but as presence. The particular company that the dead keep when the living finally let them. Jesse and Lena riding north with them in the September morning, not as burdens but as people who had existed, who had mattered, who deserved to be carried as something more than guilt. That was new. That was something Caden hadn't known how to do before 4 days ago. The pines thickened. The trail climbed. Below them, the territory they'd ridden through spread out in the morning light. The distances looked different from here. Smaller in the way that hard things look smaller once you're on the other side of them. You can see the whole shape at once. The beginning and the end. The thing it was. He could see the arroyo from here. Just a line of pale ground in the distance, indistinguishable from everything around it unless you knew what you were looking at. Where the horse had gone down. Where he'd crawled into the brush and run the cut and dragged himself to one knee in the full afternoon sun and stayed there thinking about Jesse while the blood soaked through his shirt. Where a painted mare had stopped. Where a woman had stood at exactly the right distance, close enough to help, far enough to retreat, and said, "How many came after you?" Strange how that distance looked different now. 4 days ago, it had felt like a very long way to have traveled. Today, from up here on the ridge, it looked close, manageable. The kind of distance you cross in a morning without thinking about it. The valley appeared below the north ridge. He recognized it. The creek running through the center still visible from this distance, the line of cottonwoods marking the water like a signature. The flat ground alongside it, good bottomland, the kind that rewarded patient work. The remains of the old cabin he'd seen years ago on a cattle drive still standing against all reasonable probability, which felt like something. Not too much, just something. "There," he said. Sawati looked, took it in with the same attention she gave everything, thorough, unhurried, forming a real opinion rather than a quick one. "The cabin," she said. "Is it? Needs work." "How much work?" He considered honestly. "Substantial work." "Can it be fixed?" "Most things can be fixed," he said, given time and the willingness to do the work. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the valley, at the creek catching the morning sun, the cottonwoods in their September yellow another few weeks and they'd turn gold, and then it would be November and cold at night, and the work of winterizing a cabin that needed substantial repair would have a new kind of urgency. He was planning ahead. He noticed this. The planning. The specific detailed thinking about what came next, not in the abstract way of someone passing through, but in the concrete way of someone who intends to be there for it. He'd stopped doing that somewhere in the years after Prescott. Stopped planning past the next job, the next town, the next paycheck. Planning felt like something you did when you had a stake in the future, and he hadn't had a stake in the future. He did now. She was looking at the valley too. "Sawati," he said. "Yes. I'm not asking you for anything. You don't owe me." "I know," she said. "I'm here because I chose to be here." He stopped. Accepted that. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. And then there was a moment, brief, real, unhurried, where neither of them said anything and neither of them looked away, and the valley lay below them in the morning light, doing what valleys do, which is exist patiently and wait for whatever arrives. The mare started down the ridge toward the valley without being asked. She knew where the water was. She knew where the grazing would be. She knew in the uncomplicated way that sensible animals know things, that the direction toward something was better than the direction away from it. He put his arm around Sawati's waist, not for balance, not out of necessity, just because it was where his arm wanted to be, and he'd spent 10 years not listening to what his body knew, and he was done with that particular discipline. She didn't move away. She leaned back slightly, just slightly. The particular lean of someone who has decided that the person behind them is steady enough to lean against. The valley came up to meet them. The creek said what creeks say, the sound of water moving over rock, which is the oldest sound there is, and the one that means more things than any other. The cottonwoods said what cottonwoods say in September, their leaves beginning to consider the turn. The cabin waited with the patience of structures that have been left alone a long time and have made their peace with it. And Caden Rourke, who had been moving away from things for 10 years, stopped moving away. The mare reached the valley floor. The creek was cold and clear. The cabin needed work. He had time. He had, and this was the thing he would carry with him into all the days that followed. The thing that changed how everything felt, someone to do the work alongside. He stayed. The end.